Hi, and welcome to Module 5. In Module 5, we're going to be looking at our second novel for the class, and the novel that you're going to be looking at is Oryx and Crake, and Oryx and Crake is written by Margaret Atwood. It's part of a trilogy, and the trilogy is called the MaddAddam Trilogy. This is a fairly recent piece of writing. It was first published in 2003, and it deals with a lot of modern technology and a lot of very politically sensitive and currently very topical kind of issues that you might find disturbing or problematic. So a little bit of a warning, this is one of the most controversial, probably the most controversial text you're going to read in this class. There's some things that some readers might be sensitive to. Things that pop up. She is concerned, I think, with morality and changes in morality in the United States and in Canada. And what she tries to do in Oryx and Crake is she tries to extrapolate on current trends that she's seeing. So what you'll notice that's being attacked in Oryx and Crake, one of it is the use of, I guess, the sexualization of underage girls. So there are not really graphic, but troubling depictions of child pornography. There are other things going on in the text that also kind of might push your buttons. A lot of things about genetic engineering. I get the feeling that Atwood is not a really big fan of Monsanto or any kind of genetic engineering. Some of the things that she writes about in here are shocking and somewhat unbelievable. Some of them are rather shocking and even more shocking because they are believable, because they actually did happen. Focus on some of the genetic hybrids that she creates, because at least one of those genetic hybrids actually does exist. Other things to look at for Atwood. Let's see, focus on differences between characters' senses of values. There are characters who, even though they're human beings, they almost qualify for that kind of Xeno feel. They don't really see the world the way the standard human being does. They have, like, and the major one you'll find who does this is Crake. And Crake has a very rational, very logical perception on who human beings are and what human beings should be like. The Xeno elements, you'll see these as you read into it, but the most important Xeno element that occurs in Oryx and Crake is very imaginative and at the same time very disturbing. The question that Crake is absorbed with throughout most of his life is, are the problems faced by human beings simply due to the fact that we are human beings? And if we were re-engineered, or if we re-engineered ourselves, would we be able to overcome some of the problems that we're having? And this, again, is a very disturbing, very difficult issue. It's to ask, do we run into problems simply because of who we are as a species? So other things that might cause you some difficulties while you're reading this, Atwood has an odd sense of humor. And much of what she does in the re-engineering that Crake does of human beings is very crude, rather funny at the same time, at least from my sense of humor. But again, be aware that this is going to be there in the novel. Part of what she does, she thinks that much of the trouble we run into, at least from Crake's perspective, is having to do with our sexual desires and our need for monogamy and differences between men and women. So when Crake re-engineers human beings, he decides to make them in a way that sex is very, very different. And it gets kind of graphic with a lot of description of how the Quakers' bodies work, and the Quakers' bodies do not work quite like our bodies. So be prepared for that. I think a lot of xenofiction and a lot of science fiction in general is engineered to frustrate or anger readers, and because of that, I'm not going to give anyone an out for reading this one. I've warned you, I've given you preparation for reading this one. You don't have to write about it, and if you find that it's something that you simply can't move your way through, you're free to stop reading it and read other texts and do your journal entries on other texts. You'll still be able to pull an A in the class. And I realize this is the most potentially offensive text in the class. At the same time, I think it has more power than any of the other texts that we're going to read in this class because it's longer, because it develops the themes in more detail, and just because Atwood is a powerful and very, very effective writer. If you're already familiar with Atwood, it's probably because of The Handmaid's Tale. And The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopian text which takes place in a future Earth where some form of disaster, I'm not sure what exactly has happened, but some form of disaster has rendered most of the women infertile. And so the plot of this is any woman who is fertile is basically brought into the household of well-to-do men so that she can serve as her handmaid. And this comes out of a biblical reference when one woman was barren and had to bring her handmaid in to produce children. So The Handmaid's Tale is a very strongly feminist text, and again, a very disturbing text looking at what she saw as conservative trends at the time that she wrote it. One of the things that I haven't quite figured out about Oryx and Crake is I know that Atwood is a strong feminist, and yet at the same time, the women characters in Oryx and Crake are not very strong, and in fact, sometimes their passivity and their failure to try to make any change in the world around them can be tremendously disturbing. So keep track of that and see if you can try to explain in your journal entries what you think is going on specifically with the female characters. Make sure while reading this that you can draw a distinction between the author and the characters. It would be, I think, a horrible mistake to try to read this book thinking that Crake speaks for Atwood, or even that Jimmy speaks for Atwood, because Jimmy is the main character. Reading this, you'll find that it is challenging to read because of the form of the novel. It doesn't always stay in the same time frame. It starts at a point very, very late in the narrative for the text, and then it skips back many years and then skips forward. And so you have a lot of shifts in time and how the story is told, and it's come to you from the perspective of a character whose actual name is Jimmy, but who also goes by the name Snowman. And Jimmy, because he has some emotional and mental problems going on at the time when he's telling the story, he tends to shift around a lot. So be prepared for that. Be aware that you're not going to get a linear text that starts in the beginning and moves straight forward and moves to the end. Last thing I would say about Oryx and Crake is try to maintain a sense of humor, because if you don't, it's a very, very dreary read. Atwood intends it to be funny, but in a very dark and biting way, with things that are going on that should be much funnier than they are, except for the connections that they have with the actual world that we live in. But please do try to maintain a sense of humor. Try to look at the examples she uses as imaginative, and definitely, as much as you can, focus on what she might be driving at, what her target might be in bringing up these examples. Anything that you see as ridiculous or frightening or scary, try and ask yourself, what exact thing in the modern world is she trying to attack? Because I will tell you that Atwood's piece is one of the most strongly allegorical ones we're going to read. The comparisons in it are so incredibly clear. Now, also, what we can do with Atwood's piece, more students write about Atwood than just about anything else we read in this class when we get into that big essay that people write for this class. There are lots of things that you can dig into. I'll give you a few hints for things that I've seen people look into before. One of them, there's a thing that goes on with refrigerator magnets, and it's a very small piece of the novel, but people have looked at it and said, that's very, very deep. There's a whole lot going on here. People looked into the kinds of animals that are created and what they might mean. People looked into individual characters especially the more troubling characters, and asked why are they there, why do they look like they do. So this is one of the prime candidates for your analytical essay because it is so easy to dig into, and digging into it reveals that there's so much going on below the surface. So that's your reading for this week, and I hope you enjoy it.